Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Let's see if we can get everybody in. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? No? Okay. Yeah, you can. Okay, brilliant. Okay. Welcome, Dina. Dina, are you there? We have some other trainers joining us from the globe. It's wonderful. We have Diego in Italy, Diego Zaffaroni, who is a trainer from Milan, Italy. And we have Dina, who is all the way from Indonesia. And we'll be having some others join us. So Fatima, are you there?
Yes, dear, just on phone.
Oh, really busy, really busy. Let's see if we can find, let me find, there we go. Good morning, Diego from Italy. How are you?
Very good morning, Yvonne. I'm well, thank you. And you, how you doing?
Absolutely fine. So, as I mentioned, everybody, just before we start with Mr. Jolly, it'd be good to introduce some of our trainers that are our global trainers. And well, Diego, tell us a little bit about yourself and where
Oh,
you are.
well, I'm in Milan right now, and back after some time spent in India this year, and I love that experience, as challenging as it was. And before that, I also I lived in the north of Iraq for 3.5 years, and I truly enjoyed it. And it's great to travel and share what Jolly Phonics and the products published by Jolly Learning can do to support children's reading and writing. Yeah, so it's great to see you today, Yvonne.
Yeah, and it's wonderful that we have some other trainers joining us and supporting Fatima and all of you who are joining us today. And Diego and I have collaborated in many areas of literacy, not only Jolly Phonics, but with reading and writing, and our experiences really in the international field, which is very different, isn't it, Diego? It's very, very different working in English as a second language environment than in a native speaking language school.
It is, you can go in different places, but you find very similar challenges.
Yeah.
And Jolly Phonics is a program that really support children who have English as the mother tongue, and also English as the second or the any additional language can be. But the needs of second language learners are very specific. So you, with your experience, Yvonne, can really highlight what is really important to consider when you're working in such an environment. Yeah.
Yeah, it is different. It is completely different, and I'm hoping that today this will show exactly what you need to think of. It's almost like parallel teaching. So I know that you'll be joining us for a while, Diego, and it's wonderful that people can hear and see you,
Thank
because
you.
there's a lot that you can actually bring to the additional training for 2021. This is what we're looking at, especially in our areas of expertise, which tends to be reading and writing at the moment. It's really prevalent about the reading and the writing. So thanks, Diego, and we'll catch up with you a bit later.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, and have a very good day today with the
No,
training.
thank you. So, Fatima, how are we doing? Let's see if we can get Fatima online. And if you would like to, Dina, we'll try and find Dina, who's another trainer who's joining us today, and Jen. So let's see if we can find them. Dina, would you like to pop up? No? I feel it's like how do you call it, a news show, isn't it? You're waiting for people to come and they don't come. No, real life, on the pulse every minute. Here we go. So Fatima, how are we doing, Fatima?
Yes, dear. I'm just actually looking to the participants' problems. Okay, coming in 10
Okay.
minutes. I'm there actually in the waiting room and looking into the list to see, coordinating with
Okay.
the other organization as well.
All right, I'm just letting in Mr. Jolly. So here comes Chris. He's joining us.
Great.
And he should be popping up in a moment. Let's see if we can find him. Okay.
Morning.
Good morning.
My apologies for delay.
Oh, not at all. This is what Saturdays are about. We're allowed to have delays on the weekend.
Working out the technology.
Well, you know, it is one of these things that I've noticed, that everything affects everything at the moment. Whether somebody sneezing in Canada can affect the connection here in Spain. It's just been terrible this morning.
Yeah.
But wonderful to see you in sunny London.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Yvonne.
Okay.
Hi, Dina. Wonderful
Hi.
to see you too. Yes.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Yvonne. Nice to see
Hello.
you.
Hi.
Yeah, and Chris, you just missed Diego. Diego's joining us, and I believe we have a few other people joining this morning. So it's wonderful.
Yeah. Good.
So what we'll do, I think Fatima is still letting a few people in. It's just how it is with large amounts. And, you know, what we're looking at this morning is how not only do the materials work so well in a native environment, but also with English as a second language. And what I'm hoping to bring, as you know, Chris, is the diversity of the materials, which is huge, absolutely huge. So we'll be exploring that this morning.
Yes. And Nagla, nice to see you here too.
Yes. Yes, where's Nagla? Let's see. I'm hoping I can unmute some people. Let me find Nagla. Yes, Nagla as well. Here we go. I've asked her to unmute so she can say hello. So
Yes,
we have.
hello
Hi,
everyone.
Nagla. Lovely to
How are
see
you?
you. Hear you. Yes.
How are you? Yes, I would never miss such a meeting. Okay, thank you for inviting me, and thank you all. Thank you, Chris, for helping and being supportive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Diego, I see you with us. Welcome. Hi.
Yeah, so there's Diego. And I think we may have Jen coming from Bulgaria.
Yep.
So it's quite nice that what it is showing this collaborative approach that all the trainers have in like the jolly family that we have, in all the skills that we have as well, that we can all come together and bring our expertise together, because we all have our core knowledge, but we all also have our specialized knowledge, which makes us unique, and that's what makes this kind of training great, when we can hear what other people are doing with materials. Because it's standard, but it's not, isn't it, Chris? It's kind of like there's a standard approach, but there's also that diversity.
Yes, and I thought it was very well put by one person who said that in the first year she did it according to the book and recommends people to, and then after that she adapted it to her own preferences and to her own experience, and that sounds nice because it personalized to your strengths.
Oh, definitely, yeah, and it very much is the environment you're working in as well, and dare I say, the class, because I've had classes that have changed dramatically from one year to another. The personality of the class, the energy of the class, and that kind of an effect. And I remember one year I had a class of 15 boys and 3 girls. And that was very challenging. That was very challenging, to say the least. Yeah. So I think we're nearly there with Fatima, are we nearly there, Fatima? Fatima,
Yes,
Fatima.
dear. Yes. Hi,
We-
Yvonne and Chris.
Hello.
How are you?
Hello, Fatima. Very well, thank you. We've got December weather here, which is cold and early nights. So we miss the kind of weather that you have in Pakistan.
Yeah, it's very pleasant here. Um, we have winter chills, and we can say that it's a nice sunshine coming from my room window, and I'm just busy with the chats and WhatsApp and emails.
Yep.
We can start in just 5 minutes, okay?
Yes, fine. Yes, lovely. I see you letting people in.
You can't
Yeah.
imagine. We have got 30 participants in the last 10 minutes, and everyone wanted to join in. There was some problems, and as you see that we always wanted to let people get in. We want to give them some chance to join. Just join.
That's fine. And you have people from, I mean, most people will be from Pakistan, of course, but you have people from many other countries, I believe.
Yes, we have some from other countries as well, from Dubai, from Sri Lanka, one from India, and we have some guest speakers, guest trainers as well.
Good, lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that these opportunities where we can have people from other countries just shows that you're not working in isolation. The fact that we can see what is happening in other countries makes you feel that it's not just happening to me. And although our environments may be slightly different, the way children are learning is changing, but we generally have the same kind of hurdles. And hopefully that's something I can explain this morning. But the more international we can get with these meetings, I think people leave thinking, oh, it's not just me. It's not just my class. It's not just my environment.
Yes, there's a lot of shared experience, which is really nice.
Yeah, yeah. And equally, I think we're all finding I dare not say post-pandemic, but some people are still working online. The challenges of that skill set, having to learn so quickly how to teach online, has been.
I think teaching has been one of the things people have had to adapt almost more than almost anyone else, because it's one thing just to work at home and still be working on your computer. But with teaching, your pupils are suddenly at a distance and working remotely, and you need to be able to have influence on them still, and keep them on task and be able to teach without many of the ways that were previously available of being able to display materials and go around from desk to desk and see what has been written and all the other things that are commonplace on teaching, and suddenly there's new adaptability needed, which is quite challenging.
It is. And many teachers I know have gone back to school, if they are going back to a school environment, with parallel teaching in mind. And this has been just in case you have to go back to online teaching again. We're there. And Dina, Dina, you've had to go completely online. How's your experience been?
Oh my goodness. I could cry every day about how to, but thank you very much. My name is Dina, and I'm the only Indonesian Jolly Phonics trainer at the moment. And thank you, Chris, for your support, and Yvonne, your endless support, and always trying to involve me in everything, and I learn a lot. But my experience using Jolly Phonics is what is it? If I can say, I never thought that I have to teach Jolly Phonics online. I as a teacher who has been doing this for many years and doing it offline, hands-on activities with my children, very young children, like 2 years up to 6 years old, and I was really have to switch the way I do things so that the children still get the feeling of how this Jolly Phonics works with them. And the most important thing is that I have to be connected to parents also. So before I start my year using the Jolly Phonics, every year I have to share this knowledge to parents, of course, because I don't want to cause any confusion between how they teach the literacy at home and how the children are learning it at school. So I don't think it's going to work if what I do at school and at home is not relevant. So there's no point of I'm teaching a, b, k, d, while the parents is teaching A, B, C, D, like like that. So it's really irrelevant and it's not effective at all. So I think what teachers has to bear in mind that you don't only educate your children, but you have to inform the parents that you are using this very, very effective method. But what I find out this past 8 months is that I have to switch from the very hands-on activity into a story-based learning. So everything I teach the children is through story. And thanks to Yvonne, always convinced me that the power of a story. Thanks to Yvonne, I also make my own books, my own canvas stories about kites, about insects, about letter to the zoo, about cooking. So everything, every little, the new words that my children need to know about my theme, it's coming through stories and they love it. They love it, the parents love it. So all I need to do is share the books that I made to the parents, saying, Mom, I'm going to read this book with my children tomorrow. Can you please read them tonight? And then I can play with them the extended activities. So thank you so much. Jolly Phonics has no doubt. It's very easy offline and online. Yeah. So Jolly Phonics, when you're using that, when you already use that, when you're already familiar with the method, the system, what you're gonna do or how to begin using Jolly Phonics, it's going to work online, offline, or however method that you're using. It's going to work. Synthetic phonics is the best.
Yeah, and I think we've all learned a lot by working online, more than we ever have.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I've learned more about the adaptability of the resources as an in-class resource and then online as well. I've had to look at it through new eyes to see how it works.
Yeah.
And this integrated and blended approach has worked very well. So, it's the way to go. I think this is where we're going to be going.
Thank you.
Fatima, how are we doing? We're all eager to hear Chris speak, I have
Yes,
to
Yvonne,
say.
I think we should start now. We have 85 participants, then they will join later, okay? The others who are late. Let's start. I think we should start now.
So we'll hand over to Mr. Chris Jolly, the CEO of Jolly Learning, and it's always a pleasure to hear what he has to share with us, because it's been a journey for many years for Chris, as you know. But let's listen to these wonderful presentations that he does. And Chris, let's put you on mute.
That's it. Lovely. Thank you very much. Well, look, it's great to be here. It's great to be talking with everyone. I see we're 83 people and from many, many places. And I'm delighted that this has been organised. So Fatima has been an amazing trainer in Pakistan, and I'm always impressed at her knowledge and understanding. Yvonne, the same in Spain. Wonderful, and it's great to see other trainers here as well, and who no doubt contribute as well. So I will just do an introduction. I will be setting the scene, if you like, giving some of the background, particularly as the conference says, about the significance of Jolly Phonics, how things have changed so much as a result. Yes, Phonics has brought change, and it's also influenced change generally in terms of other published material, and in particular in terms of government and academic advice on effectiveness and how to be more effective in this crucial skill of being able to read and write in English. It's the language of communication and opportunity for everyone, and it's now really an essential skill for children everywhere. So there are a number of different aspects I want to go through. Let me go to share my screen, to share the presentation I have, so that we can all go through this together. And so this is where we are. So, effective teaching of English. And the things I want to go through with you really is something of the story of Jolly Phonics, because that will show how the process of change has happened. And talk about the evidence, so something on the research that there has been and what that has indicated. It's got guidance for us all in terms of what we can expect. I'd talk something about products and product development. And then I also want to talk about the follow-on, which from Jolly Phonics is to go to grammar, Jolly Grammar, and why and how that extends children's ability with the language. And finally, I'll say something about training. So let me start by just getting this to work. Sorry. Yeah, so what has changed? Now, it has been a profound change. And you heard Dina talking earlier about how she may be teaching the letter sounds, abacur, and then the parents are still in the conventional and historic way of saying ABC. And so that's been a huge change, this move to letter sounds rather than alphabet names. I remember in early days being in conferences, and I'd ask people, when you're teaching reading, what do we call the first letter of the alphabet? And most answers would be that it would be A. And so I would then say, okay, so what's this word? K-A-T. And so I'd get cat. And I said, but it can't be. K-A-T. And then somebody would say Kate. And of course it is. And Kate is a girl's name. She's married to Prince William. But it means that if we use we use alphabet names, we can give children the wrong clues. And then they say that reading is so difficult. And it implies that it's their fault, when of course it's not. It's the methodology we've been using. So English has so many more sounds than letters of the alphabet, really because of the way the language has evolved. The alphabet as it was good at the time of the Romans, but its life has moved on. And so you see there the two letter sounds, S or S and O. And O is a digraph because it's two letters, but just one sound. So, and with this change has meant that instead of memorizing words, children are able to work them out. There's a code there. And for reading, they blend the sounds together, and for spelling, they segment those sounds, and then they're able to write them. And it has an enormous result. And I'll talk something about this, about how children do learn faster and enjoyably, and it's widespread. Children from different backgrounds all able to succeed. So let's introduce you to the authors. So these are Sue Lloyd and Sarah Wenham, both from the same school in Suffolk in England. Sue's great strength has been understanding the principles of this, of how learning and teaching letter sounds and the blending has been so important. And that having tried to influence people in her local authority and elsewhere, then we went forward. And Sarah is the one who's been able to interpret this into the look on the page and all the different materials that we have. Now, I first met up with Sue all that time ago, and she wanted to know how we could go forward, and she was frustrated. from the point of view of government, if you like, and the administrations, she was getting good results, and therefore she wasn't a problem and didn't need any, they didn't need to be concerned. But she wanted to take this further. She saw this as something which wasn't just being a good teacher, it was about the methodology. And that meant it was transferable. So after doing a pilot in school, we launched in, as you see there, in 1992. And that it went on to breakfast television, and that really caught the imagination hugely. But we went and encouraged research in a variety of different places. And indeed, on our website now, there is research from a huge number of different countries. But I will talk later about the one in Clackmannanshire, which was one that was particularly effective. And from that, things started becoming policy. I've marked the ones where it's been policy in the UK, but this is a trend that's been happening elsewhere. Both for synthetic phonics, so the kind of thing we're talking here, and about the move from that into grammar becoming mainstream in primary schools. So we all started with this book here, the Phonics Handbook. And it was a teacher's manual with photocopy masters. And with it, teachers were able and did make such impressive improvements and gains in the teaching of reading. And you see there the wonderful quote that we had from Professor Alice Coleman, which at the time I didn't think, I thought, well, that's very kind of you, Alice. But of course, things have turned out very much like that. Now, let me show you something about the evidence. Now, this is a school in Clackmannanshire in Scotland. And this was when we carried out this particular study. The teacher here, Annette, you'll see that she's holding a flashcard with the digraph for I, as in tie and lie, i.e. And the children all pretending that they're sailors and pretending to salute and to go aye, aye. And they all look a funny crowd, as you can see. But nonetheless, they're all engaged. They're all doing it. And so in a very easy, simple way, they're learning that those two letters put together, whenever they see them, they say I. Now, what was the effect of this study? So the study had both experimental classes that used Jolly Phonics and control classes that didn't. Now that is going further than I wanted. That's right. Let's go back here. Here we go. The schools that use Jolly Phonics and those that use the national guidance that applied at that time in England. It took a year, and there were these two researchers. And for Joyce Watson, it was her PhD study. And at the end of the year, not quite a full year, 28 weeks, but that's very nearly a year being 36 weeks. So both groups were matched in terms of the age of the children. And at the end of the study, the children were 5 years and 8 months old on average across both groups. And in the control group that had followed the national guidance of the time, the children also had a reading age of 5 years, 8 months. They'd matched the growth, the advance in their chronological age. But for the schools using Jolly Phonics, their reading age had improved by 1 year. And they were now 12 months ahead. They had an average reading age of 6 years and 8 months. So some were more than that, some were less. And that was a quite remarkable study and result. That it was saying that you could have swapped the children around and the teachers around from one group or another, and you would have got the same result. That it wasn't something where there was a lot more money or time or other resources put in. Simply a change of methodology produced such a dramatic change. And so if you can imagine, this had a huge effect in terms of public opinion. And an indication of this is the sort of press reports that occurred when these results were announced. from a time when there was a feeling that, well, of despondency about educational standards, about the teaching of reading, suddenly there was a sense that you could make enormous gains simply by getting it right, by changing the methodology. And so it was something that was reached very widely. And let me then summarize the two key features that have come not just from Clackmannanshire, but from other research that has been carried out. A number of them on our website, work by, for instance, Marlene Grant in South Gloucestershire, Dr. Morag Stewart in Tower Hamlets in the East End of London. Very formative studies and a consistency coming from them. And the first is this one, that the children learnt to read and to write twice as fast. But there was another finding, which in many ways was just as exciting, and that is that it worked across all different backgrounds that the children could come from. That it wasn't just limited, for instance, to native speakers. It was true for children who did not have children as their first language, English as their first language. Hence, it's very applicable, this teaching, for teaching English as a foreign language. But it was also true for children of different, if you like, socioeconomic backgrounds. So those children who came from homes where there wasn't a literate heritage, if you like, or tradition, and there were perhaps few books in the home, they also did just as well. And finally, that boys did as well as girls. And this is significant because historically boys had underperformed girls, and there was a complacency about it. It was just one of those things, you know, you can't expect. But now a measure of how the boys compare with the girls can in fact be something of a test, if you like, as to how effective the synthetic phonics is being taught. And if the boys significantly underperform the girls, the spotlight should not be thrown on the boys so much as on the methodology used in that particular school. So the results in that sense are really exciting in terms of inclusivity. Now, I just wanted to say something on the products, and you'll see more, obviously, on our website. You'll see more from distributors around the world. But let me just give some indication because it can be helpful. So not a bad way to start is to take something like the Jolly Phonics Starter Kit, which has got a huge range of materials that can just transform the teaching. But I should point out that this is a kit for the classroom. It does include the Phonics Handbook, and the Phonics Handbook therefore calls for photocopying to produce sheets for the children to work on. A good companion to it is the whiteboard software. So where a school has got a whiteboard and can use it, then the teaching can come from that whiteboard, but with the other materials you see there supporting it. So posters for the wall, flashcards, and graded readers that can take the children through. You'll see there the Phonics Handbook, so very much a starter for the whole program. But increasingly nowadays, rather than using the Phonics Handbook, schools prefer to use the pupil books and the teacher book that goes with it. And then in the pupil books, there's one page for each lesson. And in the teacher's book, there is the guidance for that lesson. And typically, we encourage the teaching of one new letter sound every day. So with 42 letter sounds, that's 42 days, so about 9 weeks. And below you'll see other material that is very supportive and a good basis for the teaching, and particularly therefore the Phonics Handbooks, the Finger Phonics books, both a board book for individual use and big books for whole class presentation. And for really, if there isn't the whiteboard, the Finger Phonics big books are just the best way to teach each new letter sound. With a big display, and from there you can go into the story for each letter sound. You can pick out words that are in the pictures that have got that sound, You can encourage children into blending for reading words and to segmenting to get the sounds. And from there, it moves into the readers, and you'll see there's 4 different levels there: red, yellow, green, and blue. And for the red, it starts when they've covered all the letter sounds. Now, in fact, people have said, look, we want to be able to get going earlier, so we have other material that will take us there. And let me come on to some of those later. There are other materials that can also support this, which are really useful. So the audio is the Jolly Songs, and they have a song for every one of the letter sounds, and in that song, there is the sound. These are very infectious. Children just love them to bits. They get played and played. So as teachers, you'll find you get to hear it an awful lot, but that's fun. Posters of various sorts, not just for the letter sounds, but also for the tricky words, for the alternative spellings, and so on. Alternative spellings of the vowels. And other things you see there, DVDs. The workbooks, often used in school, but probably the pupil books are more appropriate for that. And the workbooks are better for home use and to give children a different experience at home from one they may get at schools. Puppets are fun. They come into the materials all the way through, and children love to see that they can have a reality. And the Jolly Phonics Extra that is there is a good remedial product. It's also good for home use, for English as a foreign language. So if you have pushy parents who really want to get going with their children early and want something to, Jolly Phonics is ideal for that. We sell it particularly to countries that have English as a second language or foreign language, and where parents have got the resources to go for something like that. Now, where do things going from here? Well, we have a new logo, and that new logo is now being phased in. It is a fresher, lively design, and one where the colours, instead of being on the word phonics, the colours are now on the word jolly, and it allows that word jolly, funny word as it is, to be used quite widely, and you'll see that happening. And then the designs have been changed as well. And the pedagogy, the actual teaching methodology, has really been strengthened in what we're doing in various little ways. And for instance, on that particular sheet where we're introducing the sound shh, you'll see in the top right-hand corner, there's a little tricky word, wallflower, and in it there's a word, and that word is I, the single letter I, because that is a tricky word. And it therefore indicates very subtly, if you like, a guidance for the pace and the time to introduce specific tricky words. Now, I mentioned that we have readers coming in for the period when children have learned some of the letter sounds, but not yet all of them. And the little word books and the orange readers are just for just that. They can be used when children have learned just a few or just one group of letter sounds, and now they're able to read words and to blend them. The Our World readers there, with the one showed being rainforest birds, that's for later. That's in fact beyond blue level. So that's when children are getting really quite advanced at an early stage. Really quite, they know not just all the letter sounds, they know many of the alternative spellings of vowels. They can blend words for themselves, even longer words. And of course, it's the kind of topic which opens them up to the much more, the wider exciting things that exist in the world around them. And one of the great reasons for reading, which is to broaden the mind and to be able to hear and see about exciting things that go beyond their immediate life. And at the bottom, I mentioned how we're under development is the Jolly Classroom. So that's an extension and development of our whiteboard software that will take it further, but which will be a while yet before it's able to be introduced. I want to say something about grammar. So this is an immediate follow-on from the phonics skills. The phonics skills typically take just a year to be introduced, depending on conditions. And that gives a ability for children to be able to read simple words and to write them, but it doesn't complete the picture for them in the sense of how they can become fluent in expressing themselves in writing, as well as in understanding and being able to comprehend more complex text. And grammar is quite a broad subject. In a way, we use the term to cover things that might go beyond what you might think of. So it's much more than just parts of speech. It's about the complexity of the language, about tenses of verbs. It's about how we lay out the page with paragraphs and punctuation. And to teach these skills in primary was an innovation, was not what had been done historically. And yet children are able to pick these up earlier. They find them interesting. And the result is that they can produce pieces of work that are impressive. And they will have skills that they can then take with them. And of course, from being able to read and write and be capable in doing so, then the world gets opened up to them and they can read more complex texts, and so their education can move forward well. So the program for us is Jolly Grammar, and we take forward this with handbooks again, with pupil books and teacher books, and then with other material, in particular dictionary and support material for the teaching, such as big books. Now this is a program which goes over 6 years. So what you're seeing there is Grammar 1, and it goes all the way up to Grammar 6. And this takes children all the way through their primary or elementary school years, so that by the time they then move on to secondary schools, they do have a really profound understanding and ability in being able to use the language. So that's the natural progression from starting with Jolly Phonics. Now, as I said, I wanted to say something about training. It's obviously extremely important. We have here a methodology for teaching reading, which is one that can make such a difference, and one that teachers can use in a really enjoyable way. Although there is skills to be taught and mastered, which is a challenge for children, at the same time, it's one that can be done in a very engaging way. And when they do, they get such a thrill at the achievement they have, and they find it fun. So we're often hearing about children who really enjoy the teaching. I remember one teacher who told me that when she'd done the last of the letter sounds, AR, saying R, she told the children they'd done really well and they weren't going to have to do any more. And far from being thrilled, they all groaned. And they said to her, "Oh, miss, can't you think up some more for us?" So they were really engaged with this teaching, and that's just really nice to hear. So for the training, there's a lot of options for you, and you need to feel that you can be in control of this. We try and provide as good a guidance and as readable a guidance as we can through the manuals. So that's the Phonics Handbook and the Jolly Phonics Teacher's Book. We also try to be as supportive as possible on our website and with the videos that are around, which can be seen on YouTube, they can be seen on our website. Many of them from trainers of ours who are sharing their experience. There is, of course, lecture training. Now, that's what we typically think of when we think of training, and that's what today's event is about, of course. And it's lovely that everyone is here and we're able to support and provide guidance in this way. There are others, though. So there's the online course from CPD College, and I noticed in the chats that one of the one person who's on this course here had been from Pakistan, had been on the course and in March, and was saying how valuable it had been. Yes, indeed, it is a really there's much more content that we've been able to put on that course than really is possible to put on a lecture training course. So I think so it complements it very well. And my final comment there, as you can see, is that explore competitors, but to explore more widely. Do see what our government advice may be, do see what others are doing, do see what academics are suggesting. But I invite you to look at all the evidence that you may see with an eye to judging it, rather than saying that just being a passive absorber of it. And so I'm saying, and Jolly Phonics we're saying, and trainers, that you should teach all the letter sounds, including the digraphs, early, and blending and segmenting. You won't necessarily find that everywhere else. So have we got it right or not? Now, we seek to be judged because the results show children doing well. What are you seeing from elsewhere? It is with that depth of understanding, that ability to be courteous to those with different views, but to be able to judge what is being said, which will mean that you have strength in your understanding. And not to feel, if I may be so bold, that government curriculum should be too fierce a guide for you. Bear in mind that the government officials and the people they use are not necessarily as sharply at the cutting edge as for instance, you may be. And that they do their best in giving guidance, but they tend to be behind the curve rather than ahead of it. Government guidance tends to follow practice in the classroom, and good practice in the classroom, rather than necessarily anticipating it. So the important thing is that you are knowledgeable, and you're knowledgeable from both study and from experience. And that is then profoundly powerful. And it, among other things, of course, enables you to win the respect of parents, who ultimately are the people we're all of us working for. Let me, as I draw to an end then, let me just mention something about becoming a Jolly Phonics trainer. The important thing here is that you will, to a very large extent, be self-taught. You will have taken a lot of efforts to become knowledgeable. You will know more than we can provide you through training courses of all sorts. And in particular, you'll have learned so much from classroom experience, and over several years typically. And this will all have enabled you to achieve outstanding results. So you will have used your knowledge and ability to do that. And that will have reinforced your understandings, and indeed enabled you to adapt and show initiative in what you're doing. And you may very well therefore have been giving training already. So it is a demanding role. It looks for you to have very considerable ability. And of course, with it is the need to have really great enthusiasm to enable other teachers to be able to achieve in the same way. And the focus of someone who is a Jolly Phonics trainer is not to be it as a representative of Jolly Phonics, not at all. It is in order to serve the teachers in front of you and enable them to achieve well, and to use the knowledge and experience you have of Jolly Phonics in order to achieve that. But there's a freedom to express views by the trainer that are their own and which will be helpful. So I hope all that has been really helpful as a start, as an opening for this this wonderful day. And I wish you a very good day in the hands, particularly of Fatima and of Yvonne. And my thanks also to both of them for inviting me to be part of this as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we're very thankful to you, Chris, for being there, for helping us and being there. Everyone was very much excited to see you and listen. You see that you have got the sound knowledge of all the products. And I'm very happy because you have discussed these products here. I'm going to discuss these products in great detail in my session.
Great, lovely.
Okay. I'll just do the technical part, which is always most worrying, getting the screen up to work properly. Oh, this is always the moment, isn't it? Thank you very much, Chris. And it's so true in what you were saying about how, you know, the knowledge of the product, but also having that foundation knowledge makes such a huge difference, and how you apply it into your individual setting. That is something that, you know, as you said, doing the course or doing the training makes a huge difference to how you apply it in your setting. So thank you, and I hope you're going to stay and join us. Well, I'm going to move on now as the time is going, and give you my perspective from how it's been. And some of you know me, and if you don't, I have been working as a British teacher in the UK, and then I moved to Spain, and I had a variety of roles, which I became a head teacher in a British school in Spain. And this gave me both ends of the problems, really, from working in a classroom, from also being at the management level, where you had to administer what was going on. You had to be careful about where children were going, from where they started and where you wanted to get them to. And this really opened my eyes into what the ESOL, the English as a Second Language environment, in really embraces. So I'm going to share that with you today. So thank you for joining us for this on our day of training. And this is what I'm going to be looking at today. So the session is going to be looking at the 5 core skills, and we'll be expanding this to offer other suggestions and observations, and what it's like working in the ESOL environment, and the challenges that you probably can understand and relate to what I'm going to say through the training session. And the 5 core skills are extremely important, because this is our roadmap. This is where we need to get the children to. But as Chris just mentioned, you know, the environment's changed. So what would work in a native speaking country may not work at the same pace. And I'm going to use this word quite a lot, pace, than in your environment of teaching. And there's a lot of things that can affect our pace of teaching. But, you know, before I continue, there's a few things that we need to know that's important to understand how children acquire language. I've been to hundreds of schools globally, and I found there was something missing. And one thing that was missing was the understanding of how we learn language, not only a second language, but how we just learn language. Now, some of you who have been to training sessions that I've done will remember this slide. It's one of my favorite slides, and I'm going to pop it up now. And as you can see, it's the brain. And I like to start here because we think about how we learn things. And if you look here, it's an amazing little map of how the left side and the right side works. But what you can see is what we are trying to acquire. And with children, it's a building up process. You know, this is an adult brain, and we never reach 100% of accuracy in all of these areas. And that's what makes us unique, really. But what it does is show that we can have strengths and weaknesses in areas of learning. And as you can see, the left side is mainly dominant for language, and the right side is the creativity, music. We even have faces, shapes, and maps. And that's really important for us to know, is how the brain acquires language. And it's not one side works without the other side. They work together. And they work together by building up all the nerve systems that are making connections with everything that is being learned. Now, why is this important? It's important because our physical learning affects what we retain. So the multisensual, the kinesthetic, and the way we learn will impact on all our future learning. So if we don't make these connections, children won't have the right foundation in place. And this is one of the good things about the Jolly Phonics method, is that we are constantly making connections, be it audio, be it visual, be it with body movement, with the chants. The children are using their emerging learning styles to make connections with the language. And it's not like a lamp. If a lamp has a broken cable, we just get another one. No, with children, we are constantly building that. And it's important to mention this, because what I have noticed with implementation is that often something is taught with the sacrifice of something other. And small children really need to have that interaction with the kinesthetic, learning with their fingers. They need to make that contact with letter shapes, making them with Play-Doh. What for? Because what they will do is transpose that to reading and writing later on. So just a quick look at the theory behind why we learn and how we learn. And also that the eye, as you can see here, faces, shapes and maps, the eye is always trying to make sense of a shape. And eventually children put this into practice for letter shapes. So it's quite an important thing to know, that it's where we're getting to, always the point we're getting to. Now, as a teacher in the school with English as a second language, you've probably got to deal with quite a few things. The biggest challenge for all teachers is the amount of time that we have for teaching. So, you know, in a British native school or a native school, they may be doing their literacy hour, but the language is there all the time. In an English as a second language teaching environment, we only may have allotted slots to teach English. I've been to schools where they may have English with other subjects like art or physical education, but the bulk of the teaching is in the mother tongue. So your time may be reduced down. And one thing I know about working with small children, an hour is never an hour. You know, by the time they've sat down, by the time they've needed to go to the bathroom, you probably have 45 minutes. So you have to plan well, but more importantly, you need to know where you want to take the children. Also, we must reflect on the age of the children. As Chris said, we can start very well with small children, and perhaps the progression will be longer. However, it would not be impossible to start with children who are 6 years old. There are many countries where children do not start the reading and writing process until they're about 6 years old. However, this is a faster process. As the one thing probably is that children will have an understanding about letter sounds, maybe not in English, but in their own mother tongue and their own alphabetic code. And they'll be looking at ways they can transpose this. If I was to say to you, do you remember how you learned English as a child? You probably couldn't. But if I said, if you learned English as an adult, you probably had to put lots of connections into your own language, look for similar sounds, maybe structures, and that would have helped you somewhat. Life skills even, but children don't have this. So the method works very well. I've even used this with secondary children without perhaps the songs and the chants, but certainly understanding the sounds. And phonics is not phonetics. That's something very important to understand. Phonetics is the international sound language. Now, the environment, as Chris mentioned, the teaching environment can play a huge impact into the teaching. So again, if you are in an environment where children are hearing language, or they can hear English at home or maybe on the television, then that's great because we're getting some support there. But if the environment, your only English that you're going to have is in your classroom, then you have to deliver a wide range. Now, luckily, as Chris said, we have a huge amount of resources that can be used to do that. But as you'll see as I move on, you can also additionally add to that vocabulary acquisition. Resources, well, as we move on later on, we saw some of the resources, and Fatima will be talking a little bit more about resources and how you can get them. But what you have noticed is there's a huge range. You may not need all of them to get started. And as Chris said, you know, the handbook, and we have the teacher's book. But what I would like to mention here is that these are not resources for you to photocopy and pass on. And I mention this because many people say about soft copies. There are no soft copies. The handbook does have pages that you can photocopy, but please be mindful that these resources are not to be resold on or soft copies. Now, your knowledge. You know, if I was to tell you back in 1998, I made huge mistakes when I first started because it was a kind of new system. And I was just coming out of that time when sight words were being taught to children. And we had a very mixed information about what to do with phonics. So it was beginning to take pace. So I was working with phonics with children of special educational needs. and they were outweighing the children in the mainstream class. So the school decided to take on the whole Jolly Phonics program, and the literacy levels went right up. So it meant that we needed to know exactly how to move on with using Jolly Phonics. So I'd say the first year was a learning year, and then the next year, as Chris said, we kind of got the rhythm of it, and we knew how and when we needed to use it to get to the optimum levels. And it still continued to be a really good special educational needs resource. And readiness for phonics. There are periods of time where children are just too young to be learning this, but you can be playing the songs, the chants, subliminally, passively learning. Children can be passively learning the letter shapes, they can be environmental. However, trying to start a child off too soon may mean that when they actually start learning phonics, they've got bored of all the materials, they've got bored of all the songs and chants. So again, you can do it passively, and children can be ready for phonics, the next stage, which is learning the letter shapes and the letter sounds. And then finally, your school curriculum. This can change from country to country, and also the criteria children have to meet by the time they're 6, and then moving on to starting primary. If you are in a country where children will be at preschool, maybe you want them to be able to enter primary with skills, certain levels of skills in place. And other places, it may be the 2nd year of primary, the 4th year of primary. It depends where you need to go. So I say that because it's a bit like a journey. If you don't know where you need to go, you don't know how to plan to get there. So just opening the book and hoping that day by day we'll get there eventually, make sure that you have some structure and make sure that you have some screening in place. So let's have a look at how it all comes together. Now, as I mentioned about the brain, so you can see that the cognitive part is really important. And also mother tongue, both languages together. There is no problem that children can learn 2 languages together. It used to be an archaic view that you had to learn your mother tongue first before you learned a second language. But what we know is that that doesn't really matter now. Children are born wired for language, not for reading and writing, but certainly language. And you can hear that children may come from parents who speak 2 different languages and how they can respond to that. They may make errors, they may mix up, but eventually it gets sorted out. So there is no issue with children learning 2 languages as young as possible. But apart from learning the language, wouldn't it be the advantage being that they can build up their phonic knowledge for reading, writing, and speaking, and as I mentioned before, making these connections all the time to their own language. And what I have noticed is the strategies that children have learned using Jolly Phonics with the blending and segmenting, they transpose that often to their mother tongue language in their own language classes. Their own language classes may not have the same delivery approach. However, one good thing is the strategies are transposed, and those strategies are then moved on to other areas of learning. When they do physics, when they do chemistry, the blending and cementing. And a bit later on, we'll see how that still works, even for us now. So as you can see, getting it right at the beginning is a big thing. So here we have our child, and a native speaker can hear a word in a context and it generally can make out meaning, and even small children in a native English speaking environment. But for second language learners, they are hearing a word for the first time and they may not be able to give it a context. So as we can see in our illustration, so the girl, she can hear a word, but what she is trying to do is make sense of it through the audio, maybe stories, maybe films, maybe conversations she can hear. So in ESOL teaching, we may only focus on vocabulary, providing a workbook that offers all the key vocabulary in a meaningful context. And there may be audio and visual to support this. However, it relies mostly on flashcards and children just making the connections with that word. I'm holding up a flashcard, I'm holding up a flashcard. This is not a bad way to learn vocabulary at all. So just remember, as children are learning the synthetic phonics method, they also need to acquire vocabulary. Some schools may be using CLIL, which is context language in learning. And again, that is quite a heavy resource in vocabulary. But then again, it's delivered in standard English. So if it's in standard English, it's not in decodable. So a lot of children are only reading for the gist. They're not getting the full comprehension. And also what we have to think about is multisensory activities. Many of the English class resource books that are probably supporting your Jolly Phonics materials will be mainly focused on a standardized way of promoting English. They won't have decodable readers attached to them. They won't have a phonics element attached to them. And some of them that I have seen do not project the phonics element in a constructive way. It may be all the consonants first, it may be the vowels first, and it may be just repetition of sound. So the children are learning these and not actually actively using them. So I'm not dismissing that you have an editorial to support language acquisition, but you also have got to have the compensation of children learning all the foundation for good reading and writing skills later on. So maybe something like Jolly English is a good resource to go there because it's constantly revising, constantly offering consolidation, but also is introducing new vocabulary. So let's look at our child. In the bilingual environment, children are making sense of the languages that they hear around them. And our brains are wired for language, but we're not wired for reading. As I mentioned before, children can make out intonations and sounds, but the one thing that our brain was never designed for was for reading. And reading and writing, what we hear, what we say, are all connected. We've only been reading and writing for about 6,000 years, which is hardly nothing compared to the amount of time we've been speaking, which is about 100,000 years. So it's a slower cognitive process, and it's also one that we need to build up with not only multisensory activities, but also environmental print that children can see the letters that they are learning, they can see them. So having things like the freeze that goes up group sound by group sound, we don't just throw it all up there together, that children can see their progression. It's also a good tool for revision. And even children start looking for things in their name. If they have their name in another symbolic alphabet, seeing the English version of that, they start to look for that. They start to look at environmental logos and then making connections. It's an empowering moment for a child to be able to see that what I've learned, which is a s and an a, I can put them together with a t and I can say sat, sat. Can you imagine? We can't remember that process, but it's an empowering process for children. So let's have a look at some things that can help you. One thing that I'm just going to pop in here is a free downloadable of the Jolly Learning webpage. And I often refer to this and make little Zoom pods and all the things that are on there that can be used in your classroom that are for free and also can be integrated into the materials you're using. But this is a brilliant resource for you, the teacher, because what you have here is something that you can pop into your teacher's toolkit, and it gives you the variety, it gives you the expansion of the alphabetic code and how it can be used in its advanced levels. As you can see, the green here, we have what we teach to children, we have where we can see it in a word, but also we have the extension of how it becomes a complex code. So for you, the teacher, you are teaching the simple code, but you know, as we move on into grammar, we start doing the complex code. So this is a really good resource for you to be familiarizing yourself for later on. And also when you get that really bright child who says, but you know, but what about castle or city? Why has that got an S sound? And here you have it, and you can explain this. But of course, this is something only for you, not for the children at this point. But I thought I'd pop that in and mention that to you. So let's remind ourselves and go back to the 5 core skills. And what you can see here are the groups of letters. And the letter groups that come to, the letter sound groups are in a specific order. for a reason. And this is because children start with the first group to be able to build up their blending and segmenting skills pretty quickly. And this is really important that we can see the progress, and children are beginning to gain that skill. They're beginning to have letter recognition with sound correlation. They have an interest in the shapes of the letters, and also we're starting to blend and segment. So what we are finding with this excuse me, is, as I mentioned, the connection with the mother tongue language, and also making connections with letter shapes and letter sounds in what they see. Now, it's not only the material that we're asking the children to interact with, like the pupils book, or as Chris mentioned, we've got the readers and these resources like the finger phonics, which have the tactile resource, but also children are making connections with vocabulary they may have learned. As I mentioned, if you are using another resource, we want to make continuous connections. What I found maybe about 10 years ago when I was traveling around is that within the literacy hour, it was like, right, we're going to do our Jolly Phonics now, boom. And then that's finished and we're going to move on to something else. So the children were just learning their Jolly Phonics in isolation. And there was no connection to the other part of the literacy hour. And there was no connection to the other parts of their learning. So in the art session, we could have been saying P for pink. Do you remember that sound? P, P. We have pink, and we have Do you remember that sound? We have red, making constant connections. And once you start doing that as a teacher, you will find how quickly it can just come into your teaching routine. I want you to sit down. Let's all do it. Sit down. I want you to stand up. So the children are hearing these sounds all the time. And they began to make connections to cross-curricular information that they're getting. Language acquisition, I do keep going on about this because we don't want children just learning for production. And this is one of the things I found when I first started working in Spain, is that I had children who had wonderful pronunciation and wonderful production, but no comprehension. And that was an issue, is that when we moved on to free writing, we had a deficit. So it's something we're constantly doing using visual cues. And also, as I mentioned, a clear plan of where you want to get to. So if you're saying by end of term 1, keep it fluid. If you haven't got to where you want to get to, don't rush it, but just make sure that when you start in term 2, you have a good revision plan before you move on too quickly. It's hard to go back when you've moved so quickly forward. And also what you have to do, regular screening, regular assessments, because if 40% of the class hasn't got something, why haven't they understood how that diagraph works? You need to maybe step back and revise before you move on, because something like, for example, not getting the diagraph correct can mean they won't get the alternatives correct as we move on. And the additional resources. As Chris explained to you, there's a lot of additional resources, but you may want to make things that are unique for you in your classroom. We have the alphabet plate, a really easy resource for children to use. And also the sound hands. And here we have the diagraph, we have the vowels and the alternative hands, very simple ones. And I'm just going to show you one favorite that I really like, which is another alternative way, and it works really well online. As you can see here, we can move our torchlight around. And I like this one because I've even extended this one to here, the diagraphs. You see, they move it. And all it is a jiffy bag and black paper. So I hope that's given you a few ideas. Okay, so as we move on, but children are learning the letter shapes and letter sounds all the time, and they hopefully we're making connections to where we want children to be. So they may be getting their vocabulary from the class books, from TV, from games that have been done in the classroom, and also environmental. Maybe family members can speak some English, or they're in groups where they can have that. But one of the things that often comes up in many of the trainings that I've had is pronunciation. And I'm going to, for the teachers worry about their pronunciation. So we'll have a look at that as the slides move on. But one thing that I want to mention here is as our groups move on, as our groups move on, generally, the first few groups are done pretty fluidly. Teachers can get through these quite easily because we're listening to one sound, we're doing blending and segmenting. And then once we get to group 4, we have to slow down. And we slow down because clearly you can see we're doing the alternatives. And I would advise you to make sure that you've got the first 3 groups really secure and before you move on to group 4. Now, the one good thing with the material is it is constantly on a spiral where children are learning and then they're going back to revise very passively with the activities that they are doing within the books. And this is one good thing. However, the books, please don't rush through them. They are a really good consolidation activity and they're a good way for you to understand where the children are at. But equally, for you as a teacher, think about this stage. Think about this stage of where the children are. And before you move on, make sure that you as the teacher understand how they are pronounced, how they work. And a good thing is about the songs and the chants that we're using is that can help the teacher a lot as well. But also, let's move on to the next one. Most children only hear English in class, and this can be an issue for you as a teacher if you have to get them to a certain level by the end of the term or the end of the year. So visual cues are huge at this point, and not only to help children to make connections with what they can see and what they hear, but also some kinesthetic activities are needed here as well. So let's have a look at what we've got. So children need to hear letter sounds in the words. Now, this can also be done by using the big finger phonic books and also the fingerboard. You need to be able to point, they need to be able to look at the letters, and they also need to hear production from you as the teacher. We also need to understand that Jolly Phonics may not be the class resource, the only resource. So how are you connecting? And a good way is if you're using another editorial to get vocabulary, look at the words that may have the initial sounds or have the sounds in the middle so that you can get the child to make connections. So for example, in our first group, we have, so maybe if they're learning colors, we can have pink, we can have the purr. Maybe if they're learning numbers, we can have the 10. Or maybe if they're learning, let's say a verb, we can have sit or sat, making connections all the time. Because although we do have vocabulary lists in one book, you have spelling lists in another book. So what I would say is a balance. Spelling lists that are done for children as you move on are specific because they have decodable spellings and they also introduce the new sounds and maybe some digraphs. But also you may have spellings from your vocabulary book. Don't overburden the child with too many spellings. And I would say stick to the Jolly Phonics spellings because these are the ones that will give them the foundation to be able to cope with the vocabulary spellings as they move on. And also understanding, as I mentioned, the pace. When you really look at the groups of sounds that come in, the first few are very quick and you may be thinking, wow, this is easy. I can get through this really quickly. But as I mentioned, change the pace when you get to the digraphs. As Chris mentioned, with native children, they have a very, very speedy acquisition because they are learning this. Even in the school I was working in England, we had up to 20 or 25 languages being spoken, but the children were listening to the language all day. In the playground, in the dining room, in the classroom. So their acquisition of vocabulary was far quicker than children only having it a few times a day. And understand the range of teaching styles and activities. So we don't want it all to be book-based. We want children to be able to be manipulating plasticine or Play-Doh to make little letter shapes, interacting with each other, pair games. There's so much children can do without having to use a huge amount of resources. resources. And even online, I have found lots of activities. And I've in the pack that you'll get for this training, you'll have a list of all the activities that you can do along with additional materials. So here we are, we're teaching our Jolly Phonics, and as I mentioned, we suddenly realized that the S sound has a whole load of combinations. And I'm going to give you another example of this, the same with ch. And this is because English is not a regular language. We've adopted so many different things from other countries, and we have to have accommodation. We have to learn how to accommodate that. And this is the one thing with English, that we teach a rule, and then a bit later on, we break it. But the one thing is that getting this foundation done correctly at the beginning enables the children to absorb that and be able to say, does it look right? Does it sound right? Am I spelling it right? So as we hear here, a few examples, we've talked about s, but look at ch, choir, chalet, chop. I mean, it really is difficult. But what we do is we start with the most basic one, chop, which children often, say shirt, and shirt is quite a difficult one. We often have a lot of chips and ships, but what we need to do is get them to revise these in a fun way, and that's why having a different variety to do this, one, stops it becoming heavy work for the teacher, boring for the child, and also peer learning. Children will be learning off each other. So I'm not going to play all of this, but if you doubt your pronunciation, just have a quick look at this. Once it starts, here we go.
S, s, snake. Ant. T, t, tennis. I.
Now, this may be a big asset for you if you're not confident about the pronunciation, but also I used to have this playing in my classroom while the children were doing things. I used to have it in the background, and eventually they started to produce all the letter sounds perfectly by just listening to this subliminally. They were just hearing it in the morning with our routine, coming in, putting their books away, their coats and everything. I used to just have this playing. And I may stop it and start it at different points, but I just wanted to mention this because it's a handy resource. Again, a resource for your toolkit as a teacher if you have any doubts about your pronunciation, more so when we move on to the alternatives. So I'm going to move on now to letter formation because this is hugely important, and the curiosity with letter formation begins, and sometimes this isn't done in other classes. I have been to schools where the children are going really well doing their letter formation with Jolly Phonics, yet in their mother tongue they haven't started yet. Again, we're developing that cross skill that can be transposed to other areas. So some curriculums don't allow children to start writing until they are 6. They can't start at 3. But what we are saying is that even if you're in that situation where your school does not permit children to do reading or writing before the age of 6, they can be passively exposed to what they can see and what they can hear. They can be hearing the sounds, they can be seeing the visuals, and maybe their curiosity will go on to making these into Play-Doh. So it's not explicit, but it's passive teaching. Also, the direction of print may be different from one language to another. Some countries start from the right to the left, whereas we go from the left to the right. So these type of activities that you can see in the small workbooks are really important for that directional flow. Also, it makes a huge impact on the children because as they are developing their ascenders and their descenders, they need these type of activities not only for their fine motor skills, their hand-to-eye coordination, but also making sense of the letters. And we will see in the next slide just how this can be done within your environment. It's very important for children to do mark making and also use a range of resources to do this, like chunky pens, chalk, pencils, even sponges, because they are experimenting in what will come together later on when they start putting it to print. So that curiosity with letter formation is huge. And these letter formation sheets, as we move on, the one thing I used to do is, if we were focusing on sound, is while that was being done, I would be saying, I'd be doing the letter sound, getting children to do the letter sound, and maybe repeat some words like popcorn, pop, ping, pop. And they would be going this and making the connection with what they hear and what they see. Now, as you can see, I've popped in a little visual of a child who's got some mirror writing. I just want to mention that mirror writing is not a sign of dyslexia. It is a process that many children grow through because their eyes are accommodating all the lines and shapes. So it's a process that most children go through. And if you have seen mirror writing, you will see how it'll get bigger and it'll get smaller. But usually the spelling is in the right way. They'll have the sequence in the right way. I would say that if a child is still doing this when they're about 8 years old, then they may need intervention. However, it's not dyslexia. You do not need to worry. Children will revert back with ease. So that's an important thing to know, because then if we stop that learning process and start flagging up there's a deficit when there isn't one, the child may lose out on that crucial learning moment. So let's have a quick look. I'm not going to play it all, but you will have access to this video in your pack. But I just want you to see just how important mark making is.
Emergent writing is a term that describes the process of when children begin to understand that writing is a form of communication, and their marks on paper begin to convey a message. Writing is a way of sharing one's ideas and knowledge. It is a method of personal communication and conveys a message that can be read at a later time.
Would you like for it to say? All right, that was very nice.
Providing opportunities for children to write supports their development as readers.
You're going to the zoo in a helicopter? Oh, you want me to write that down? Huh? Okay.
When children experiment with writing, they think about what they know about print and how it works. As children engage in meaningful writing experiences and are encouraged to explore and learn more about print, they are also learning about reading.
See if you can help them. And her sister played in the bedroom.
One goal of emergent writing instruction would be to help children realize that print conveys meaning. Teachers can scaffold writing instruction using several different approaches.
Jessie says he was baby.
By the end of the year, it's important for both the teacher and the children to contribute their thoughts and ideas and be actively involved in the writing process together.
All right, we're going to write a story. What's something we could write about?
About a potato.
A potato.
Or a boat.
Or a boat.
A bunny.
A bunny?
Yeah, it's a bunny.
You think we could write one about all three? You think? Okay, let's
We can
start.
write our own story.
Yeah, you can help me write this one. Once.
Okay, I'm not going to play all of this because you have access to this after the session. But what I hope it helped you see was that children are constantly trying to make connections and the teachers are enabling this. And what we can see is that the manipulation and the recognition of letters and shapes helps develop fluency later on. And this is what neuroscience is showing us. As more as neuroscience is coming into how children are learning, a lot of that, and behavioral science, it's saying that the brain is making connections all the time. That first slide that I shared with you just gives you an example of how this is being done. But what I hope you can take from this and look at it in your leisure after the thing is that we are modeling the writing for the children, also identifying, pointing out and saying the sounds, that children who are actually putting down their print, it may actually make no sense to us, but what we are getting from them is their interpretation and putting it into print for them, which is hugely important. And also the global view of language. So most schools are using English as a second language strategies without giving the foundation of getting reading and writing in. And that is to say that children are just learning to repeat and learn for an exam and throw that away, learning the unit vocabulary for an exam and throwing it away. We are not creating the spiral. It's like a plateau. There's no layering effect that's going on. So the blending and segmenting part is a skill that we often revisit. And just as children are putting these together, sat, it will move on to bigger words and chunking, segmenting as they move on. But it's also comprehension too. So we could have 25 3-year-olds learning sat. Okay, it can be quite difficult because sat is a verb and it's in the past, and we talk about can you sit down. So I wouldn't worry about that. This is just blending and segmenting at this point. But certainly you could take the advantage of if you had a word like bat, I can give a visual cue to that, or cat, cat, I can get a visual cue to that. So that is language acquisition. And what we're mostly looking at with a lot of these words at the beginning is production. Now, that is not a bad thing because we want to get the theory going of how we blend and segment. But if you have any opportunity to use a visual cue with a word that makes sense, it would be difficult to explain this now to a child. Maybe a primary child, you could talk about, well, I sat and now I'm sitting and I will sit if they're learning grammar with verbs. But now it's just a production activity. So we have sat, and then we're going to use the dots, which come up on all the flashcards. So the dots are really important, just like the patting of the hand or the s-at. These are very important because then when we move on to two letters having one sound, the children can identify this, like r, a, b, it. We don't say r-ba-ba-dit, we say rabbit, or r, a, b, it. They know that two letters are making one sound. So this is where we need to be with children. And you think, well, yeah, I'm going to get there. We eventually get there. But what we do know is that it's a skill we go back to even now. And we need to get it right at the beginning because otherwise we won't be able to use that as we move on. And also it goes with the systematic approach that children, so when you have your materials, even with the books, it might be tempting to, dip in and out, choose what you want to do, but it comes in a structured way so that children are getting this spiral going up. And you know what? We're going to try and see how this works now. And it's not a test, but I'd like you to look at this word. Now, I don't know if anyone would like to have a go, but it's the microphones aren't on, but maybe you can try and use your blending and segmenting skills to try and decipher this word. It's a Russian name. So anyway, Stepanovich Adraksin. Can you see I'm blending and segmenting? Okay, I don't know if Fatima would like to put on any of the microphones and see if somebody would like to have a go at this name. How about that, Fatima? Fatima, would you like to? Yeah, would you like to try? Would you like to try the second name? Let's see. Makar Alexei. I haven't practiced these. I deliberately didn't practice them. I picked them and I put them in. Alexeyevich Baznev. Oh, that was a bit tricky, but I'm still using my blending and segmented and my knowledge. Now, how about this one? Fatima, would you like to try?
Yes, sure. It's sounding like Joanne Baba Wede.
Yeah, it's actually it's Juan Barba Verde. So that one wasn't so difficult because the code is not so difficult. But how about this one? This one is Doesn't sound really
Already
like
familiar with Leicester, so I can say Leicestershire, but it's quite
Leicestershire or Leicestershire, or often as my American friends say, Leicestershire, Leicestershire. It never gets said properly. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that even whatever age that you are, we are constantly using our blending and segmenting skills. And this is what children are doing all the time. They are making connections to what the letter shape is, and then they need to see maybe a visual. And as you can see later on, we can put a tricky word in there, and it helps the children make connections. So I'm going to do this again so that we can, oh gosh, let's go on. So what it can do is, I'll start it again and talk through it this time. We see the letter shape, we are making the letter sound, we are blending. And then we're making, a bit later on, we're making connections that we know what a bat is. And maybe there's a tricky word, the bat. And then we're making connections to all other areas of language and what that could be. We're batting your language and what it is in my language. So what we see, what we hear, what we say, what we read, what we write is all connected. But one thing I used to do, even with my 3-year-olds, is when I used to talk about a cat, I would always say the cat, mat, the mat, the pin. And we'll look at this later on because it's passively bringing in the tricky words, passively. So the children are hearing these. And then when we go to more explicit teaching, they'll be like, I heard that word. I've heard Yvonne say that word quite a lot. I know it. I've heard her say it. So we're giving them the elements of what they hear from a native speaking class, that they hear the words and they're suddenly being able to make connections with that. So generally, this is what we're looking at. Our basic assessment. Can we read the word? Can I read the word bat? We could have a cluster of problems here in that there's no shape recognition or sound recognition or blending or oralization. Can I identify the sounds? Yeah. Can I blend them together? Can I say the word and identify the meaning? And often this one is the most problematic. Can I identify the meaning? So as you can see, I keep bringing you back to this vocabulary acquisition, but it's not only just for production, but also for what they can understand. So we can have problems identifying shapes, sound correlation. We can also have that the children knows the shape but can't remember the sound. And this is one where you have to pay attention really, because if this is a reoccurring thing where the child can see the shape and can't recall the sound, now that might be an underlying issue with audio processing or dyslexia. But again, until a child reaches that cognitive milestone of about 6, we cannot give a label, but it might be one that you can flag up and monitor within your class. And as I've mentioned, the production, but we don't have the. Now, one good resource, again, that is free, and I can't tell you how this is like a multi-purpose resource, is that the word bank gives you all the words you need in a progressive way from the simple on one side to more difficult on the other side. That if you are unfamiliar with words or you may want to have a session planned, you can use the teacher's book that has everything in there. But also if you want to make your own resources like sentence strips or things, you can use the resources here. So we have the word bank, and if you have the tricky words, you can start making your own little sentence strips. I used to make my own sentence strips because this is the beginning of reading. But if I used the words from the tricky word groups and the words from the word bank, I could start making my own reading resource. That could be a 5-minute warm-up or a 2-minute warm-up before we started our main class, getting the children to read these strips. Also, if you are going to do board work, you have a word bank that you can choose here for if you want children to do quick blending and segmenting activities, and also assessment for you, part of your teaching toolkit. And it also helps with progression and revision, because you can use many of the words that we've had in group 1 are going to be included in group 3. The ones we've done in group 3 are going to be included in group 4, and so on. So it can extend your resources that you have. So this is where we are right now, and I'm trying to be mindful of the time. is that I'm going to bring you back to where we started, which is going on our roadmap of where children start and where we get them to. However, it looks pretty simple, and we need to wrap around these stories so that children can hear the letter sounds in a context. And these are all done for you. Like we have the Jolly Stories. And it's an amazing resource because it gives children a context. It also gives you the vocabulary. It gives children some, it's also tactile. So you have that along with the extended stories that you could use with the finger phonics. Drama and role play. We can take the characters from the books. We don't have to make it difficult. We could talk about Inky, we can talk about snake, we can talk about bee, and then children are making connections there. We can have bee sorting out p sounds. We can have Inky sorting out s sounds. So those little tiles and the activities that are in the handbook, we can have them as what would Inky like? What would Snake like? And the children find it a lot easier to be able to do this if a puppet is involved. Also, as I mentioned earlier, it should cross over to all your areas of teaching, the sounds that you are doing. And one thing I've noticed that we put so much investment in children having Jolly Phonics in infants, and then they move up to primary, and they may not be doing the grammar components from Jolly, but the teachers have no knowledge of what the children have done in infants. And of course, that transition from infants up to primary, the teachers could be constantly drawing the children back to what they know. So if they are given new vocabulary, they could say, come on, you learned that sound. What is that sound? Yeah, it's v, not what, it's v. Remember you did that? So it's beneficial also for all the teachers to have an idea how Jolly Phonics works, to continue the strategies we've put in place in infants, that they continue and get developed all the way up through primary. Now, this can be such a shame if all that time has been invested in that teaching and then we do not continue. This is what makes us have strong readers and strong writers if there are teachers who can not be explicitly be teaching, but at least be saying, I know you know how to blend and segment. I know how you do know how to chunk that word together. Break it down using the same words we use in infants. Break it down, segment it. Think about the shape. Think about how it's written. Does it look right? And all these strategies can be continued into primary, even if you're not continuing with the grammar. So then we come back to here where we have all our sound groups. And as you can see, we're moving on and moving on. Now, as Chris mentioned, in some schools, they can get through this in quite a quick period. However, I do know that in English as a second language environment, it can take up to 2 years to do this. And this can also be fitted around the time that teachers have and also holidays and everything, but also the revision that is needed, the adaptation period back when we start schools and having to go over. So although you have a fluid plan to work with in the handbook, it's not set in stone, and it's best to develop your plan for implementation to fit with your curriculum and the hours you have to teach. So identify letters and sounds. It is really, really important because, again, a skill where children are developing their phonological awareness, which has been built up through blending and experimenting, building up letter shape and letter sound, and doing their robot arm, as you can see here. It may take a little bit longer in an ESOL environment, but the children are getting there using the strategies of the fingers, of the touching, and also, as you can see here, using a range of environments. Even having the different color fonts can make a big difference. And this is the skill that will start the reading process. And it is for this, the production activity with little or no comprehension. And then it's a support skill. So it's very important that children have opportunities to do this, even like you can see, a basic one by writing a consonant and a consonant, and the children are putting the vowel in the middle. Does it sound right? Does it look right? And they may make false words. And this is one of the things we have to recognize. It's about production, but then we have to be about what can you hear and what are you putting? Because in some languages, like in Spanish, the I and the I have the same sound, but they have a different symbol. So this is something that you have to think about as well. And also, I'm going to show you now identifying. This is a really good little activity. Again, you will have access to the video, and it's called Bang the Sound. I'm not going to play it all. I'm just going to play a little bit for you to see what the teacher is doing here to get children to identify. And look at the colors. I'll let you look at it first, and then I'll speak about it.
We're going to do an activity that we call pound and sound. We're going to work with sounds in words, but we're not going to actually see the letters in the words. We've got felt squares on the board. How many felt squares do you see? 3. 3. And the words that we're going to work with today have 3 different sounds in them. A consonant, a vowel, and a consonant. These are called CVC words. Our first letter will be B, C, D, F, N, P, T, U, V. That's what the first letter or the last letter will be. The middle letter will be a vowel, which will be A, E, I, O, or U, and with sometimes Y. You're going to need your fist, and we're going to pound each sound in a word. Then we're going to use our fist to sound the word out. Let me give you an example. The word dog. So I'm going to pound the first sound, D. The next sound, ah. The last sound, G. And then I'm going to slide my fist and say dog. Do that with me. G. Good. Dog. Very good. I'm going to call a person to come up. I'll say a word. You repeat that word. And then I want you to pound and sound that word. Quintavious, your word, map. 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 Awesome. Atlantis, your word is yes. 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 Awesome. Jamarion, your word is not. Awesome. That was a powerful pound. All right. Did we get everyone? Yeah. And what do we call that activity? Pound and sound. Great.
So I really like this pound and sound because it's visualization, it's the physical segmenting and blending that can help build up children's audio and visual skills. And they're making physical connections with the sounds and the words that they know. And in some countries, as you know, we can have dual learning as part of the process. Now, it's interesting that in some parts of the States, they actually have English and Spanish being taught at the same time. And this type of skill is being done in the dual language, and that's not easy to conduct. But what it does help is differentiation for children. They can start making the differentiation with the vowel sounds, as you can see here. We're using oral activities to support students with lower order reading skills. And also the children are beginning to put the sounds that they know into blending and segmenting. So I quite like this activity. But apart from that, there are other areas that we can do. I'll move on. Is as Chris mentioned about the big books, I've always used these as a cross-curricular purpose because not only do the children see the letter sound, they can hear the chant before we start. We have some context words, and these context words are really important because it's not only what you hear at the beginning, what you hear at the end, but you're hearing the key sound often in the middle as well. And we have our story, and you can expand on that story. So children are hearing the context, they're hearing the sounds, they've got a story, and we're also developing some language. But if I move on with this resource, as you can see here, what I've just said, if we move on with this resource, and I've made a note for myself there saying post-its, there's so much more we could do with this one resource. We can do air letters, we can have a story, we can ask questions. What color is the girl wearing? She's wearing pink. Can you do the sound? And we can also say, right, we can see an aeroplane. What color are the aeroplane? Red and white. White is a difficult sound, but we can certainly focus on red because it's decodable. Red, if the children know those sounds. Also, we can say, you know, why do you think he is angry? Is she happy? We can talk about emotions. Still looking at this resource, we can put the words in the context sentence, like, this is my neck. the fish nips the insect. I have 2 hands. I see a man. So we're given a context to these and vocabulary connections once again. And also, as I've just mentioned, colors, actions, nouns, and verbs. These can be taught passively. You know, the girl is running, the man is fishing, the fish is jumping, the aeroplane is flying. And again, when we move on to teach these explicitly, the children are gaining this knowledge. It's like, I've remembered that, I remember seeing that. And you can go back and revisit these pages anytime. So let's move on quickly before the time goes about tricky words. And tricky words are hugely important. And again, there's something that shouldn't be rushed. And the one thing about tricky words is not all of them. There's some decodable ones, and there are several, well, there's more than that, that are not easy to follow any kind of rule or rhythm to them. And I've put some up here: said, one, was, he, be, me, and they're tricky for that reason. And what children need to do is see these. If we want them to learn them, they're like sight words. They need to have a visual display. And we can build that up with the little word flowers or whatever type of display you want to have. But the idea is that children will be looking at these around their classroom, looking at where your display is, and building up their visual memory of how the letters in that word go. There are some that are easy to do, like the, at, that,